You're trapped. You can't move. You're lying between two wooden boats, your arms, legs, and head sticking out. The sun is beating down on you. Flies are buzzing all around. You feel something crawling on your skin, but you can't brush it off. You try to scream, but no one's coming to help. This isn't a nightmare. This was a real form of torture and execution used in ancient times, and it was so horrifying, so slow, and so cruel that it was almost forgotten by history. This method of death was called Scaphism, also known as the boats. It's one of the most disturbing punishments ever recorded. It wasn't just about killing someone. It was about destroying them physically, mentally, and slowly. In this video, we're diving deep into the dark history of Scaphism, where it came from, how it worked, and why it's one of the most terrifying stories the ancient world ever told. To understand how something as horrifying as Scaphism came to be, we need to go back, way back, to the powerful empire of ancient Persia. Over 2,000 years ago, Persia was one of the greatest empires in the world. It stretched across vast lands from modern-day Iran to parts of Egypt, Turkey, and even India. The Persian kings were mighty, feared, and respected, but they also ruled with an iron fist. Justice in the Persian Empire could be brutal. Loyalty was everything, and betrayal, that was unforgivable. They believed that the worst crimes deserved the worst punishments. This wasn't just about keeping order, it was about sending a message. If you dared to betray the empire or disrespect the king, you wouldn't just be killed. You would suffer, slowly, publicly. That's where Scaphism comes in. It wasn't for ordinary criminals. It was reserved for traitors, those the empire wanted to make an example of. Scaphism didn't happen by accident. It was designed on purpose to be slow, painful, and unforgettable. But why would anyone create such a method of execution? In ancient Persia, power meant fear. The kings believed that to keep control over millions of people, they had to do more than just punish crime. They had to terrify anyone who even thought about betraying them. So they invented a punishment that would break a person completely. Not just kill them, but strip away their dignity, turn their body into a feast for insects, and make their death a warning for everyone who saw it. This wasn't a quick sword to the neck. It wasn't even torture in a dark room. It was a performance, a cruel public show where the victim became a living example of what happens when you cross the empire. Scaphism was meant to do one thing: destroy hope. The message was clear. If you betray us, we won't just end your life. We'll erase your soul, piece by piece. And in the next part, you'll see how that slow destruction began, with two simple wooden boats. It all started with two boats, or sometimes two hollowed-out logs. The victim was taken and placed inside one boat, laying flat on their back. Then the second boat was lowered on top, sandwiching their body tightly between the two. But their arms, legs, feet, and head were left sticking out, exposed to the elements. They couldn't move, couldn't escape, trapped like a bug under glass. The boats didn't just keep the person in place. They turned the body into a container, a prison. Inside, the flesh would start to rot and fester in its own waste. Outside, things were about to get even worse. This wasn't just a clever way to hold someone down. It was a carefully built torture chamber. The wood kept the body hidden, but the parts that mattered most, the parts that felt pain, those were left out in the open. The executioners weren't in a rush. They had time. And now that the victim was trapped, the real suffering could begin. What came next wasn't just strange. It was disgusting, and it involved milk, honey, and swarms of crawling insects. Once the victim was trapped between the boats, the next part of the torture began, and it involved milk and honey. But this wasn't a treat, it was a weapon. The executioners would force-feed the victim large amounts of milk and honey, even when they didn't want it. They kept pouring it down until the person began to vomit and develop severe diarrhea. Their stomach would churn, their bowels would empty, and since they were trapped, all of it stayed inside the boat, soaking into their body and clothing. But that was only half of it. Next, they smeared honey all over the victims, exposed skin on their face, arms, legs, and even their private parts. It dripped down, sticky and sweet, and then the insects came. Flies, ants, bees, wasps. They smelled the sugar, they felt the warmth of the body, and they gathered, crawling, biting, nesting. The person couldn't move, couldn't swat them away, couldn't scream loud enough to be heard. This wasn't just torture anymore. It was a living nightmare, because the insects aren't just landing, they're starting to eat. At first, the insects just landed, crawling over the sticky honey, buzzing around the victim's eyes, lips, and ears. It was unbearable, but it was only the beginning. Soon, they started to bite. Flies laid eggs in the soft flesh, around the eyes, the mouth, under the skin. Ants and beetles crawled into any opening they could find. Larvae hatched, and the person could feel them moving inside their own body. Imagine feeling something wriggling under your skin and not being able to do anything about it. The honey and filth made it worse. The body became a feeding ground. Insects didn't just crawl, they chewed, dug, and nested. Wounds opened, skin broke, flesh began to rot while the person was still alive. The pain never stopped. The itching, the stinging, the burning, it was endless. And because of the milk and honey they were still being fed, the person kept soiling themselves, attracting even more bugs. The body turned into a living ecosystem, a slow, painful decay in full view. And the worst part, the victim was still conscious, feeling every second. The physical pain of scaphism was unbearable, but the psychological torture may have been even worse. The victim wasn't knocked unconscious. They weren't given mercy. They were kept alive on purpose, force-fed daily to make sure they didn't die too soon. Their body was decaying, but their mind was still awake. Imagine lying still for days, unable to move a single muscle, while insects crawl into your nose, ears, and eyes. You can feel your flesh being eaten. You can smell the rot from your own body. You can hear the buzzing and feel the sting, but there's nothing you can do. Some would beg for death. Others would go silent, slipping into madness as their brain tried to escape the horror. And remember, they were left out in the open. People watched. Some mocked. Some stared in fear. But no one helped. This wasn't just execution. It was complete isolation, a kind of living burial where time stood still and the pain never ended. The victim was alive, but no longer human in the eyes of those around them. Most people think torture leads to a quick death, but with Scaphism, that was the opposite of the goal. The victim wasn't supposed to die in a few hours. Not even in a single day. They were kept alive for as long as possible, sometimes up to 17 days or even more, depending on their strength and the will of the executioners. Every day more milk and honey were forced into their mouth. Every day the rot grew worse. Their skin blistered under the sun by day and froze under the stars at night. Flies swarmed during daylight. Worms and maggots fed in the dark. Their own body became a prison. And that prison was slowly falling apart. Death didn't come peacefully. It came from infection, dehydration, or being literally eaten alive from the inside and out. Sometimes the person would be too weak to scream. Sometimes they would whisper, begging for mercy that would never come. This wasn't just about pain. It was about breaking the soul. And what made it even more chilling, this wasn't just a story passed around like legend. In the next part, we'll meet a real person who actually suffered this fate. Mithridates, the man who died in the boats. Out of all the people who suffered under Scaphism, one name survived history, a man named Mithridates. He was a Persian soldier, living under the rule of King Artaxerxes. One day, Mithridates made a deadly mistake. During a royal ceremony, he killed one of the king's brothers. Some say it was an accident. Others say it was murder. But in the eyes of the king, it didn't matter. Mithridates had crossed the line, and for that, he would be made an example. He was sentenced to die by Scaphism. According to the ancient historian Plutarch, Mithridates was stripped, placed between two boats, and fed the milk and honey mixture every day. He lasted 17 days. 17. That means for over 2 weeks he suffered, eaten alive, baking in the sun, drowning in filth, swarmed by insects. People came to watch him die slowly, like it was a show. His punishment wasn't just about justice, it was about fear, a warning to anyone who dared to challenge the empire. Mithridates became the most famous victim of Scaphism. His story is still told over 2,000 years later. But was it all true? So now the question is, was Scaphism really real, or was it just an exaggerated story meant to scare people? Our main source for this method of torture comes from Plutarch, a Greek historian who lived long after the events he described. He's the one who wrote about Mithridates and his 17-day death. But here's the problem. Plutarch wasn't Persian. He was writing about Persia, not from it. That means we don't have direct records from the empire itself confirming the use of Scaphism. No royal documents, no laws, just his chilling story. Some historians believe it could have been propaganda, a tale used to make Persia look barbaric in the eyes of the Greeks. Others think the details might be exaggerated, but based on real punishments that did exist. But here's the thing. Even if it wasn't practiced often or at all, the story of Scaphism still survived for centuries. That tells us something. Whether it was true or not, people believed it. They feared it, and they told it again and again, passing the horror down through generations. Because sometimes the most terrifying thing is not knowing what people are truly capable of. You might wonder, why do stories like Scaphism stick in our minds? Why do we feel a mix of fear, disgust, and fascination? The truth is, human beings have always been drawn to the darkest parts of history, not because we enjoy pain, but because these stories reveal something deep about ourselves, about power, cruelty, and control. Scaphism wasn't just about killing someone. It was about stripping them of their humanity, slowly, publicly, completely. It was a warning, a message. If you betray us, you will not just die. You will be erased. That kind of fear, that level of control. It's terrifying, and that's why it grabs our attention. It's the same reason we're drawn to stories about medieval torture, ancient rituals, or forgotten wars. They show us what humans are capable of at their worst. But these stories also teach us something. They remind us why justice, mercy, and human rights are so important today. Because once, long ago, the world didn't have those things. And when we hear about a method like Scaphism, we don't just hear about pain, we hear a warning from the past. Scaphism might be one of the most horrifying punishments ever imagined. But as we reach the end of this story, we have to ask ourselves, why does it still matter? This isn't just a tale of ancient cruelty. It's a reflection of how far people will go to hold power, to spread fear, and to destroy anyone who dares to resist. It shows us what happens when justice becomes vengeance, when punishment becomes performance. Whether Scaphism happened exactly as described, or whether it grew into myth over time, message is the same. The unchecked power can lead to unthinkable acts, but the fact that we talk about it now, centuries later, means something. It means we remember, we look back, and we choose to be better. Because behind every brutal method, behind every twisted invention of pain, there was a human life. A person with thoughts, memories, and love, once turned into a lesson through suffering. Today, we tell these stories not to glorify them, but to learn from them, to remind ourselves what we've escaped, and what we must never return to. So if this story disturbed you, good. That means you're human, and sometimes remembering the worst of our past is what helps protect the best of our future.